Where, okay.
Whew, gotcha. All right. Well, good morning, everyone, or I guess it's morning where you guys are. I'm not sure. Anyway, my name is Will. I'm a member of Alcoholics Anonymous. My sobriety date is May 28th, 1994. My home group is called the Newark Library Group, but we've had it's a very, very small group. It consists of about 3 of us. I live in a small town out in the country. And that's enough about me. So I am going to tell you a little bit about, I guess we've titled my talk Alone No More. That was the title of my first convention I ever went to back in 1994. It was a pretty cool little convention. I would think I was about 3 or 4 months sober back when they had that. And it was just kind of profound for me. Anyways, let's get into it. I was born a long, long time ago. And so it's going to take me a little, just a minute to get going here. Boy, I swear to God, I got up to take a shower, get my suit coat and everything on. And I looked at my phone and thought, oh man, the meeting started 5 minutes ago. I'm so unprepared for this. So a little bit about what it was like for me. And what it was like for me was I did not drink for a long, long time until I guess I was about 17, 18 years old when I first got my first drunk. I had tried it a long time. I dabbled with drinking with the guys in the neighborhood before that. But as a young man, I was the guy that swore off alcohol. My father was an alcoholic 7 days a week. And my people, my aunts and uncles all told me, Will, don't ever touch alcohol. That is bad news for people in our family. And it's a true story. I am now 64 years old, and I am the oldest male in 4 generations in my family. My dad died at 52 of alcoholism. His dad died at 60, and his dad died at 58. It goes back a long ways. My older brother died a couple of years ago at 62. He was homeless when he died. So it's a pretty rough disease in my family. Cut us down pretty early. Anyways, got my first drunk and decided that I was never, ever going to do that again. I wish we were in jail. I do this in jail every Sunday. Well, not every Sunday, but I have told these guys some stuff in jail that I haven't even told my sponsor because it gets a little sordid where my alcoholism took me. Some bad places. By the time I was, I guess I was 21, 22 years old, I switched over to liquor because beer wouldn't do anything for me. By the time I'm 24, I'm starting to have employment problems. It's bad employment problems. Got fired from the same job 3 times and quit once. But it's going to take me a minute here to get together. I'm sorry. I'm just not with myself today. Anyways, by the time I'm 28 years old, I'm in the hospital. I've gone to the intensive care unit. They've given me some emergency surgery. They've cut me open and pulled out my appendix because I was hemorrhaging so much blood and was in so much crippling pain. They had to take me by ambulance. They opened me up, pulled my appendix out, and I was sitting up in the ICU room. They had sewed me up after surgery, and the doctor came up and he said, boy, I've got some good news and some bad news. He says, the bad news is bad. And I said, well, what's the good news? He says, well, the good news is there's nothing wrong with your appendix. The bad news is your liver is 3 times the size of normal. Your intestines and your stomach are green. And he goes, we may have to give you a colostomy at 28 years old. He says, what you're suffering from, it looks to me like you're suffering from the advanced stages of chronic alcoholism. And we're going to have to give you a colostomy bag. And I said, there's no way. I said, I don't even drink that much. And he looked at me and said, you don't drink that much. I said, no, I drink once or twice a week. And that's it. And he shook his head and said, well, we're going to have to get a professional up here to talk with you in the morning. And as he walked out of the room, I reached under the sheets and I pulled out a bottle of vodka and I took a chug off the bottle of vodka. You see, even at that, I was just debilitated. I was helpless at that point. And yet I still managed to get a bottle of vodka into my hospital room in between the operating room and the recovery room. I knew a nurse. She got me the bottle. Because you see, at 28 years old, I knew that I did not have a drinking problem. What I had was a bad whiskey problem. It was that darn Jack Daniels was just tearing me up. And I knew, because I saw my dad drink vodka for years, and I knew that if I could drink vodka, I could go a lot longer and it wouldn't tear me up the way this whiskey was. And so that's what I did. I walked out of that hospital a couple hours later, got a couple of shots of that, or half a bottle of vodka into me. And I walked out of that hospital and I drank vodka and gin for about 6 months, and I got better. And I went back to work, and I managed to really get it together for a little while. I managed to, I started night school. I started to get an education and a trade. It was a trade school. I went to school to be an electrician, and I got a really good job that allowed me to drink every day. And I started to drink every day. And I was pretty soon, by the time I'm 31, 32 years old, I'm an everyday drunk. And what happened to me was they let me go. And a couple times. Again, I was such a good worker. They gave me a couple chances. I failed some tests at work, some drug tests, I guess they call them, and they let me go. And what happened was I started to drink myself into oblivion. I often get into arguments with other people about this word surrender, because you see, to me, when I surrendered to alcoholism, I drank as much as I could for as long as I could, for as long as I could stand it. And what I did was, when I was about 33 years old, I surrendered to alcoholism. I finally quit trying to control it. I knew I could no longer control alcoholism or alcohol, and so I just gave it up. The house I was living in, I had never made a payment on it. I couldn't afford it. I was working for the electric company. I was a lineman. I had a bucket truck, this big bucket truck. I was a foreman on the crew. I was in charge of a crew of electricians doing major high voltage work. And my house had no electricity because I hadn't made any payments. So they turned off my electric for non-payment. I was living in the dark. I had lost my job, and this house turned into I don't know if you guys are familiar with drug houses over there, but we have a lot of drug houses here, and my house turned into a drug house. And what it was people would come over to my house at all hours of the day and night, bring me a bottle, and then they would go off in the corner, or they'd sit right at my kitchen table and they'd get their spoons out and their matches and their hypodermic needles, and they would do whatever they're doing, or their glass pipes. And I'm not really sure what kind of drugs they were doing. Didn't even know a lot of these people, but they would come in and get me drunk. And that's how I lived for about a year and a half. My mother, who lived down the road, maybe a mile and a half away, she would come over to my house, and she'd knock on the door and knock on the door and knock on the door. And I'd never answer the door because I couldn't let anyone see how I was living. You know, there was newspapers on the windows, and it was the inside of the house was just terrible. I mean, you wouldn't let an animal live in a place like this. But she would come over and she'd knock on the door, and I wouldn't answer, and she'd leave a little casserole outside the door. And I'd wait for her to pull out of the driveway, and I would reach out and I'd grab that casserole and I'd just eat it with my fingers, and I'd put the dirty dish back out on the front step. And she did that about twice a week. She'd come over and feed me like that. And so that's how I ate. And then I'd just sit there in the corner and wait for someone to bring me something to drink. And it was terrible. It was just a terrible existence. I had drunk myself into a out of society, basically. I had not had a girlfriend since the time I was 18 years old. And here I am at 34, and I am just living like an animal, just basically living day to day, seeing if I can survive one more day. The circumstances would have it, I wound up this old job. These guys came knocking at my door from the old job. For some reason, they didn't even wait for me they broke into my house is what they did. They broke into my house and took me to treatment. And they put me in this treatment center. And during this treatment center, I was set up with this 28-day program, which turned into about a 70-day program for me because I was a little hard to get at. And they suggested that I start going to Alcoholics Anonymous. And like most people, I didn't want to go to Alcoholics Anonymous. I came into Alcoholics Anonymous, and I had my two main problems, of course, where I had alcoholism and I had ignorance of alcoholism. I didn't know what alcoholism was. But they told me that I had a drinking problem. And I thought, no, I don't have a drinking problem. What I have is a people problem. You people keep screwing with me. And if you just leave me alone, I'd be okay. Give me a job where I can earn enough money to drink and I would be okay. My problems really started when I was sober. I just couldn't stand life. I was able to look back at 34 years old. I was sitting in this treatment center and I'm thinking, here I am, 34 years old. And when I was 16 years old, I had been granted 4 full scholarships to 4 different colleges, and they were free. They said, because of your academic record and the work you're doing in your community, we're going to give you a full scholarship to our college. And I had my choice. I also had a pilot's license at 16 years old. By 18 years old, I'm in jail for 31 counts of grand larceny because I don't have enough money to buy the liquor I need. So within 2 years, that you can see the change that came over me. But at 34 years old, I was just an animal. I had 1 pair of pants, 2 t-shirts, and I was smelly. I didn't take showers because I couldn't afford soap. So what's the point in even taking a shower? My teeth were all rotten and falling out of my head. I was just an animal, terrible looking. But they told me I had to go to these A&A meetings, and I went to these A&A meetings, and I tried to get a sponsor, and I had a hell of a time getting a sponsor. They had a list of sponsors. I went up there. I got 4 names off this list. First guy I called, his phone had been turned off. Second guy I called, he said, well, meet me at this meeting. And 3 times I went to a meeting to meet this guy. I still, to this day, have never met the man. Third guy I called, he says, well, I'd love to sponsor you, but I really don't have time right now. So, but call me anytime you want. And I'm thinking, well, what the hell is these sponsorship? Why did they put their name on the list? Fourth guy, I'm up there talking to the secretary. I said, this is a bunch of BS. I said, I'm calling these guys, calling, and nobody wants to talk to me. And I don't really blame them. I smelled a lot. And there was a guy sitting in the corner, and he gives me the finger, and he says, come on over here a minute. And he says, what's going on? I said, well, I've been calling these people. Nobody wants to be my sponsor. He says, I'll be your temporary sponsor. My name's Lou. And his name was Lou Carpenter. And what he was a bird colonel. He'd been through 2 combat tours in Vietnam. He'd been shot down twice. He was a helicopter pilot. And he was taking some guys out of a hot zone one time, and they shot him down. He got back to base, hopped in another helicopter, went out and started pulling guys out of the battle zone. And they shot him down a second time and broke his back. But he stayed in Vietnam for another year and stayed on the front lines because he would never abandon his guys, he said. So Lou took me on and started to take me through the steps in his way, because I was one of the guys that was violently anti-religious. I was the guy who would sit in an AA meeting, and I'd hear a speaker come in, and he would sit down at the table and say, my name is Joe, and I'm sober by the grace of God. And my fist would come down, and I'd slam that table, and the coffee cups would jump in the air. And I said, ain't about effing God, it's about effing booze. I'm enough of this effing God stuff. I just couldn't stand God. I couldn't stand to hear the word God. But that's the kind of guy I was. I was unapproachable. I was smelly. I was just a nasty person. And I was very, I guess, violent. If you looked at the car I was driving, it had dents in every piece of the car. I had kicked it for one reason or another. My house was just trashed. And anyways, Lou, the first thing he had me do before, he said, I want you to get a big book and I want you to read it cover to cover. And I thought, well, why am I doing that? There's something about steps on a wall. I said, aren't we supposed to be doing those? He goes, just read the big book cover to cover. He says, you have no idea what God is all about. You don't want to have a relationship with God, do you? I said, absolutely not. There's got to be another way. So I did that. I read the big book cover to cover, and he said, and I did it in 2 days. It's not that big a deal. It's only about 400 pages, I guess. And I'm not like I was doing anything else at that time of my life. So I read the big book cover to cover. I went back, told him I had read it. He says, what story do you identify with the most? I thought, well, what are we talking about those for? And what he wanted to do was he was slowly getting me to identify with other alcoholics. And I did identify with one in the back, and I still identify with it. It was a woman's story, as a matter of fact, but that is my favorite. He said, Will, I want you to, when you come in here on Saturday morning, he says, there's about 50, 75 people here. He says, there's a long line for coffee, isn't there? I said, yes, there is. He says, well, I want you to go stand in line. And when it comes your turn to the coffee pot, pour a cup of coffee, hand it to the person behind you in line. and then go sit down and thank God for the opportunity to do that. I thought, what the heck? I'm not doing that. I said, I don't even like the coffee here. He says, Will, you can do it or else. And he was, like I say, he was a bird colonel. He was used to giving people orders. And I was a guy who was terrified, actually. So I would follow his orders. And I went and I stood in line. I got the cup of coffee and I turned around, because I'm still shaky. And I try to hand it to the person behind me. And they kind of jumped back the first. A bunch of people. I remember this one woman, I spilled it all over her nice shoes. She was mortified. And I hit her the coffee. I said, I'm sorry, but my sponsor told me to do this. And she just smiled. She said, oh, you're such a great guy. And it was, that was the first time someone had smiled at me in probably 20 years, because I'm the only person I'm talking to at that point in my life is Lou Carpenter. I have no friends, no family, nothing that I can talk to. And after doing that for a few weeks, Lou said, well, I want you to start, because you come in here every day and you talk about this guy, Tom. You can't stand Tom. And you're always criticizing the speaker, or criticizing this woman or that guy. He says, I want you to come in here and sit down next to Tom and be his friend for an hour. I said, Lou, I can't stand Tom. We need to kill Tom. Tom is not a nice guy. He says, well, I'm just asking you to be his friend for 1 hour. I went and sat down next to Tom for an hour, and I did that for a week straight, maybe 2 weeks. I guess it was 2 weeks straight. I sat down next to Tom, and after a couple of weeks, I approached Lou and he said, and here's the other thing that went along parallel with that. He said, when you identify something in a meeting, somebody's doing something you don't like, he says, I want you to write that down on a piece of paper. He says, and then put your name next to it, and then write down a time that you acted like that. And so I was doing these exercises, and I'm thinking, when are we going to read the book? When are we getting into the book? But I wasn't ready yet. He kept telling me I hadn't done the first step yet. Still haven't done the first step yet. And I'm thinking, what are we talking about? So I would go home and I would write down these people. Julie did this. She just talks too long. I don't like it when she talks too long. She's so into herself. And then I put down the name Will. And I'm looking at this middle column and saying, Will talks too long. He's too into himself. And I thought, boy, I'm a lot like other people. I am really got all the character defects of everybody that I come in contact with. So and it taught me, it was starting to teach me that angry man prayer is what he was doing. It's kind of his back-ended way of getting me into that angry man prayer on page 67 there, where we say, this is a sick man like myself, and save me from being angry. How can I be helpful to him? And that was a really cool tool. And I remember seeing Lou after a couple of weeks. He says, how are things going with Tom? I said, Tom's a great guy. We're going out to lunch. We're really getting along nice. And the other valuable tool he taught me there was on page 20, it says, our very lives as ex-problem drinkers depends upon our constant thought of others and how we can help meet their needs. And I found out that Tom was just a lonely guy. And that's why Tom would wait till the end of the meeting. He'd start talking and he'd take the meeting way into overtime for 15, 20 minutes. And I found out that by sitting down next to him and being his friend, giving him what he needed, all of a sudden, Tom just became a great guy. He didn't feel a need to hold us all hostage at the meeting. Anyway, it doesn't matter. I learned a valuable lesson that my very life started to get better as I thought of other people and how I could meet their needs. And as I was slowly learning these lessons, Louis had me do this little exercise. It was called the fourth step. He actually approached me one day and said, Will, you can either do the fourth step with me or you can quit calling me your sponsor. He says, I want you to go home and sit down and write down the fourth step. And I remember I went home and I was still anti-God. I just couldn't do this God thing. There was no way I'm doing this God thing. And I still hate everybody in the meeting. I'm not talking to my family. My mom is still at this point bringing me casseroles. I'm probably 3 months sober at this point, and I'm still not talking in meetings. I'm the only person I'm talking to is my sponsor and someone I hand coffee to, and the one guy that I can't stand in the meeting. That's the only people I'm talking to. But I sat down at my kitchen table and there's no electricity. So I'm doing my fourth step by candlelight. I've got a pencil and a piece of paper and I'm writing out this fourth step. And as I write it out, I'm looking at this. I had this, I guess you would call it an epiphany or a moment of clarity. I don't know what it was, but all of a sudden I just looked at this list and I kind of sat back in my chair and the tears started coming. And I thought, what a piece of dirt. What a horrible person you've turned into. How could you behave like this? How could you treat people like this? What happened to the guy at 16 years old that had the whole world at his fingertips? And I just hated myself. And part of my history I didn't get into was I used to go to church 4 days a week up until I was 13 years old. And there was a little something happened there when I was 13. And I just never went back to church again. 4 days a week. So I had all the Catholic training. But I remember sitting at my kitchen table and this light with this candle. I've got the fourth step in front of me and I'm looking at it and I'm thinking, my God, what a piece of dirt. Can you help me, God? Can you do anything for me? I mean, I don't deserve to live. And I remember it was a bright light experience. I had the white light experience. My room lit up. It was the brightest light. It was the warmest light. I felt lifted up. I felt light. I felt like there wasn't a pound to me. I got warm. All of a sudden it was getting warm in my room. You know, it's like 4 o'clock in the morning, no electricity. I got 2 t-shirts and a pair of pants. And I just felt lifted up. And I sensed this voice saying to me, I'm here. I'm here. I've always been here. I just wanted you to ask. And I remember going to that meeting the next day and I approached Luke Carpenter and I didn't approach him. I walked in, I got my cup of coffee, handed it to the person behind me in line, sat there with my arms crossed, looking around the room, seeing which one of you SOBs I'm going to have to sit next to. And he gives me the finger. He says, come on over here a minute. And I walked over. He goes, Will, what happened to you? And I said, nothing. He says, you look different. Something's happened to you. I said, well, I don't want to talk about it, you know, because I had a reputation of anti-God. I didn't want to talk about, but it was within a day or so. I go back, I'm still doing this treatment and I go into this treatment center and they said to me at treatment, they said, Will, if you want to graduate, you're going to have to get a family member in here. And I thought, man, I don't have any family that can come in here. I really don't. And she says, well, if you don't get a family member to come in and be a part of your treatment, you will not graduate. And I thought, boy, if I don't graduate, I don't get that fancy little coin and I'll never get a job and I'm going to be stuck here in this limbo for the rest of my life. So I went down to the payphone. You guys know what those are still, right? I didn't have a phone at home. We didn't have computers. There was no cell phones back then. So I go down to the payphone at the treatment center and I called my mother and she says, what's going on? I said, I'm in this treatment center for drugs and alcohol. And she says, well, you don't do drugs. And we've been telling you for years, if you lay off the whiskey, you might be okay. I said, Mom, if you could come up here next Tuesday, I would really, really appreciate it. It's a little 10-minute meet and greet with the counselor. They just want to know that you know what's going on. They want to explain to you what I'm going through. And she goes, well, of course I'll be there. What time? And I laid it out. Next Tuesday, I'm standing outside this treatment center and I'm smoking my cigarette. I was a smoker back then. And I smoked a cigarette because I'm going to grab my mom. As soon as she comes in the parking lot, I'm going to get her into the counselor's office, get her back out. I'm going to get my coin, get my job. You know, I've got a plan laid out. I know exactly how this is going to work. So I see my mom's car come around the corner and there's this line of cars behind her, like a funeral procession. And what had happened is she had gotten my 3 brothers, my 3 sisters, and all their spouses and all their kids to come up to this treatment center. 28 people showed up. We walked into the counselor's office. She goes, what is this? I said, this is my family. And my family, they were professionals. I mean, there were doctors, nurses, college professors, teachers, construction superintendents, professional people. And she goes, we go in the conference room. We sat in this conference room. She goes, my office is big enough. So they had to bring in another counselor because they'd never seen anything like this before. 28 people sat in that room and they set me in the center and they said, well, tell them what you're going through. And then everybody did a little question and answer session. And at the end of that, my oldest sister, Julie, she looks at me and she goes, there's just one thing I don't understand. She goes, I don't understand why it is from during the holidays, from Thanksgiving through New Year's, you drink so much that we have to take your keys away. She goes, what is it that makes you drink to the point of passing out during the holidays? She goes, why is it you always drink so much? And I'm thinking, because that's the only time you see me. I drink like that 24/7, 360, you know, but that's the only time you see me. She goes, I just don't understand why you drink so much during the holidays. And it kind of caught me off guard. And I said, Julie, why don't you take a look around this room? I says, everybody in here has a home. You've got a family. You've got this sister, I'm saying Mariella, she gets to go to soccer practice. Betsy, she's getting to go to choir practice with her kids. I says, you know, you've got dance recitals and all these things going on in your lives. You've got televisions and jobs and careers and cars and nice homes. I said, I don't have any of that stuff. And from out of nowhere, I said, you people have no idea how effing lonely I am. And you could hear a pin drop. That room got so quiet, so quiet. You have no idea how lonely I am. And my sister Julie looked at me and she said, Will, I still don't understand. She goes, why don't you look around the room? She goes, Will, you made one phone call. And I'm sorry, this always gets me emotional. But it was such a moving experience for me. I made one phone call. And with one phone call, the people that loved me the most, the people that were closest to me in my life, they came into my life to support me and help me do anything they could for me. This was the middle of the afternoon. These people had left their jobs. They had gone down a couple hours away and pulled their kids out of college and out of school and brought them all the way back up there to spend an hour with their Uncle Will. It was pretty eye-opening for me that I had had such a profound effect on these people for so long. And I never, ever, ever had any idea that the people closest to me were so terribly affected by my alcoholism. Went back and told my sponsor about that. And of course, we turned that into an amends list, which was pretty extensive. I went and I had to start making amends to these people. One of the things that I had to make an amends for was when I was 17 years old or 18 years old, I guess, my dad had come home drunk one more time. The police had brought him home, and it was a bad scene. He was drunk, and my mom had to come home. She was working at a department store at that time, and she took the keys away from my dad, handed me the keys. She says, no matter what happens, do not let him drive. And she had to go back to work, and the police officers left. And he came up and he knocked on my door, and he had a shotgun in his hand. And I looked at him at 18 years old, you know, how we could be as teenagers. We don't get along well with our parents. And I said, you know, the best thing you can do for yourself and the rest of his family is end it right here and now. And I didn't know if he was going to shoot me or shoot himself. And obviously I'm sitting here today, so we know what his choice was. But I had to make an amends for that statement. My sponsor told me they're looking for a volunteer driver over at the Norris Treatment Center, John L. Norris Treatment Center. He's one of our first alcoholic trustees, non-alcoholic trustees, I guess you call them. For 10 years, he ran the alcoholic foundation down there. Anyways, I went to work on Friday and Saturday nights. I was driving a van, picking up 10 or 15 guys, taking them out to a treatment center, or taking them to an AA meeting, excuse me. And then I would take them back to their treatment center. That was what I did for the next 15 years. Every Friday and Saturday night, I would take guys to an Alcoholics Anonymous meeting. And never once could I tell them they were a worthless human being. But that's how I made the amends to my father. And that's how I started to get into this sponsorship business. My sponsors told me, he says, Will, just give your name out to these people. And I remember coming to my sponsor after about, I don't know, probably 3 or 6 months of driving this van. I said, Lou, I've given my name out 100 times. You know how many phone calls I got? Zip. Not one person has called me. I said, this is a terrible way to be a sponsor. And he looks at me and he cocks his head. He says, Will, did it ever occur to you that maybe God wants you to be a driver? And I thought, my God, who cares what God wants? I want to be a sponsor. I need to recover. He says, no, well, God wants you to be a driver. Just be what God wants. And, you know, he was steering me. He kept talking about this God stuff. And boy, I used to not like that a lot. He told me as far as this God stuff went, and I'm still working on the first step. I'm 6 months sober, and I still haven't got the first step down. And I'm trying to work these other steps. He's trying to work me through this book, but I still haven't got the first step now that I'm powerless. And he said, well, I want you to go home and start getting on your knees every morning. I thought, Lou, I don't have to get on my knees to pray. If God is all around me, I can talk to him any time of the day, right? He says, Will, I'm not asking you to pray. I'm asking you to get on your knees in the morning. He says, you can do it or else, like he always said to me, like that stern colonel's voice. He says, get on your knees in the morning. So I would get on my knees in the morning and I put my hands together, and I put my head down and go, this is stupid. And I get up and I go out to this little factory job I had managed to procure. It's really a bad job. And for 2 weeks, I got down on my knees, put my hands together, bowed my head and said, this is stupid. And I get up and I go to work. And, you know, after 2 weeks, something strange happened. He goes, how's that getting on your knees in the morning? I said, you know, Lou, people are smiling at me. People are opening doors, holding doors for me. I said, it seems to be like people are treating me a lot better. He says, well, this was never an exercise in getting a relationship with God. This is an exercise in bowing down, just submitting yourself to possibility that there's a power greater than you. And I said, well, I'm willing to submit to that. He says, you're great. Now we're ready to work the steps. And we started to talk about the third step. I had to go over to his house and he said, let's hold hands and get on our knees and say the third step prayer. And I got to tell you, awkward. That was very uncomfortable for me, but we did it. And once I got through that, there was a lot of awkward stuff I had to do from then on out. This whole 6-step stuff about become willing to have these defects removed. He said, your language is offensive, Will. You have to learn another language. You can't talk the way you're talking. He says, if you take that F word out of your vocabulary, you really haven't got much to say, do you? I thought, well, no. So I had to start saying, forget about it. Every time I said, what the forget about it is wrong with you people, and I would go through my day like that. And it was just pretty cool the way he would identify my character defects, and he would identify the opposite trait he wanted me to practice, and he would have me practice the opposite trait. And I felt like a little kid. I felt like I was in kindergarten. I was almost a well-educated person. Oh, by the way, I never graduated high school. That little incident with my father, they decided to give me a diploma because, the poor kid, let's just give it a diploma. I think it's so he doesn't come back next year and try to get his real diploma. But they gave me this weird diploma. Anyways, my world started to come together as I started to make amends. I had to go to my mother's house every Sunday afternoon and bring her donuts. I didn't have to bring her donuts. I had to go spend an hour with her as my amends process. He said, I want you to go to your mom's house. She stayed up worrying about you for 20 years, to wonder where you were, what you were doing, and if you were even alive. And she says, you go over to her house every Sunday morning, and the only rule is you can't talk about Will. You can talk about anything else, you just can't talk about you. So for the next 18 years, I went to my mom's house every Sunday afternoon, spent an hour with her. I found out what her favorite dress was when she was a little girl, when she had her first kiss, her first car, what school was like, her entire life, having us kids, raising a family. I found out everything about this woman. I mean, amazing stuff that I had never had any idea. My mom had no money. And she was, she had raised a brood. And so what I did was I found out she liked donuts. I would stop and get her a dozen donuts every Sunday. And I was in an AA meeting one Saturday afternoon, and Lou Carpenter was within earshot. Of course, I said it loud enough so everyone could hear it. I said, yeah, I go to my mom's house every Sunday and bring her a baker's dozen of donuts to make my amends. And I get the finger. He says, what's a baker's dozen? I said, it's 13, Lou. He says, Will, you're a thief. He says, how many do you pay for? I said, 12. He says, you're a thief. You got to pay him back. You got to go to the grocery store and make amends for stealing a donut every week. I thought, good Lord Almighty, how am I going to do that? He says, well, why don't you go up and put 11 donuts in the box and pay for 12? Well, the first time I did that, I took them over to my mom's house, and she opened up the box. She says, Will, you're missing a couple. I thought, man, I just can't win here. I did go back and put 2 donuts in a box and put a whole bunch of those tissues in and tried to make up for it all at once. And I handed it to them, and they called the manager over, and they said that it's a guy with the gum again. It's a guy with a gum. He's over here doing, they called the manager, and I was just all embarrassed. There was a gum story there too, where he would send me to the grocery store to buy a little pack of gum. And he said, Well, I want you to get a pack of gum and then to go stand in the longest line you could find and just wait your turn to go up and pay for that pack of gum. I said, what the heck am I doing that for? Well, to learn patience, because I had none. So he was teaching me, and he treated me basically like an idiot. But these simple little things he made me do, I didn't even realize what he was doing at the time, but he was so good for me. He was just the perfect sponsor for me. And we had other amends. We had just a ton of other amends we had to make. But anyways, I missed that whole point of my story, which was alone no more. I was probably a couple months sober. I had just had that white light experience. Lou was having me get on my knees. And I called him up one Friday afternoon. It was bad. I got out of work. The traffic wasn't right. And I called up Lou and I said, man, I am going to kill somebody. You're not going to believe what those SOBs did to me today. And Lou says, Will, if you got a bathtub, I said, yes, I got a bathtub. He says, when's the last time you cleaned your bathtub? I said, Lou, I've been in this house 7 years. So I'm going to say it's been about 7 years since I cleaned that bathtub. He says, Lou, he said, Will, go clean your bathtub and call me back when you're done. And I got to tell you, I was so angry. I was fit to be tied. So I went into this bathroom and it is disgusting. I mean, I'm on the outside of the house. I'm looking pretty cool. You know, I'm driving for Norris. I got this little factory job, going to meetings, handing people a cup of coffee, sitting next to the guy I don't like. So that's looking pretty cool. But inside, the inside, it's a mess. You know, they say clean house help others. My house was not clean. So I go into the bathroom and I am so mad. I cleaned this bathtub. I scrubbed for hours. I got the toilet and the commode and the sink and did the floors and got the cobwebs off the wall. And I just shined that place up and it was nice. And it's about 7, 8 o'clock. And I called him up and he says, Will, do you have a stove in your kitchen? I said, well, yeah, when I had electricity a long time ago, I used to burn pizzas. I'd put a pizza in on a Friday night and I'd open the stove on a Sunday and say, I wonder what caught fire in here, you know? And so I get he says, clean your stove, and I call me back. And this is 7 o'clock at night. So I go out in the garage and I get a hammer and a little paint scraper, and I start chiseling out all the, that's how I clean my stove. But I'm mad. I'm still fit to be tied for what these people, how they treated me today. And I go through and I clean the stove and I go through and put all the dishes and wash the dishes and put them up in the cupboards. And I take all these beer cans, empty beer cans. I still got thousands, hundreds, I don't know what it was, just piles and piles of beer cans and stuff and empty whiskey bottles. And I put them all in bags and took them out in the garage and I swept the floor and I got it all nice looking. And I called him back about 10, 11 o'clock at night. He says, Will, do you have a vacuum? I'm like, what the hell's wrong with this guy? I got some serious problems. I'm going to go drink if he doesn't talk to me. And I had one of these little it wasn't electric. It was a wooden, it had a wooden handle and it was a little wooden box and you push it back and forth and the rollers would pick up the stuff on the floor. And he says, vacuum your rug and call me back. He says, I swear this time I'll take your call. And I got out and I vacuumed that rug in the living room and I vacuumed and vacuumed and vacuumed. And I was so mad and I'm picking up and I'm dusting and I'm wiping everything down. And I looked around the house. It's about midnight. I thought, boy, this looks pretty nice. And I went and I ripped the newspapers off the windows and I looked around the house and I thought, this is nice. This is good. This is a good thing. And I went to bed. I was tired. I was exhausted. I cleaned like a maniac. I went to my AA meeting the next day and Lou gives me the finger, says, come on over here. He says, Will, I apologize. He goes, but what was it you needed to talk to me about last night? And I looked at him and I thought for a moment, Lou, I can't remember. I just can't remember what it was. But, you know, one more time, he had me go into action. He had me take some action. I didn't know why I was doing the action. I didn't question why I was doing the action. I followed his directions. And the result was the problem went away. And after that meeting ended, I went home and I'm kind of sitting there by myself in the house and I'm looking around thinking, boy, this is a pretty cool house. And I heard the tires on the gravel driveway. And uh-oh, here comes my mom. What am I going to do? And I hear the knock on the door like she always did, like she's been doing for the last year or two. So, and she knocks on the door, and I look out and I see she's standing there and I walked over and I opened up the door and she came in with her casserole. And we sat down at the kitchen table and we had lunch. And it doesn't sound like much. It doesn't sound like much to you, but it was the world to me. It meant everything to me. Finally, I had cleaned my house and people were starting to enter my life and I welcomed them into my life. And it was pretty cool. It was really cool. Today, I see I'm getting towards the end. Boy, I wish I had another hour. I wish I had gotten up an hour earlier. But today, my life is so full. That 15-year gig of driving that van for those people at Norris, that thing I had to do with the church at 13 years old, I had making amends for that. He made me make an amends by, this is going to sound really weird to you guys, but at 3 years sober, I went on a blind date. At 3.5 years, I married this woman. She was an elder in her church, and I ended up starting to go to her church. And I got elected to the youth committee. I was a youth leader in the church. And I called Lou and I said, Lou, ain't I spiritual? And Lou says, well, you remember that thing we had with the church that you could never make an amends for? Remember I told you if you remain willing, God will provide the path. And I thought, well, yeah. He says, well, this is God providing the path. He says, this has nothing to do with you being spiritual. This is God giving you an avenue to make that amends. And that's why they have this thing in that big book. It says that perhaps there are some amends we can never make, but we remain willing. And I've found that if you remain willing, God shows up 3.5 years later, he gives you that path. So we ended up taking these kids, me and Lou and this other woman sat down. She had been sober forever. And we sat down and we came up with a plan for Will to make these amends. And the plan was, and it's important too, that I sat down and made plans. The plan for the amend was, we're going to take these kids from the youth group, which basically was take them on a ski trip or take them on a camping trip and stuff like that. But no, Will's job as a youth leader was going to be taking these kids to a soup kitchen. And so every Thursday night for the next 10 years, I was going to load up my car, and I had to recruit my wife to fill up her car. So many kids got into this going down to the soup kitchen up in Rochester, and it was homeless people, and we would feed them dinner for an hour. And while the kids are in the kitchen preparing the meal, I'm out there hanging with the homeless people, because these are my people. Because you see, I've been driving for this treatment center, and I see these people get out of treatment and they go to the homeless shelter. They go from the homeless shelter, they go to jail. They get out of jail, they go to the treatment. And it was just this big circle. They kept going around and around and around. And these are my friends. Actually, and I've been going to the jail now for 10 years. So I just, all my people, this is where my people hang. They hang in treatment centers. My people hang in homeless shelters. My people hang in the jail. That's the people I'm comfortable with. My world is so full today of all the people that I've met and all the people that I've just had such a wonderful journey. I remember some of these kids would go through high school. We take them through high school. They leave town. They go to college for 4 years. They come back and they call me up and say, Will, can we still go to your soup kitchen once in a while? And I remember taking these kids to my soup kitchen, and the homeless people thought these were my children. They thought they were my children, especially this one young girl whose dad I was going to try and sponsor some years later. Her dad died of alcoholism. And some years later, I met Tracy in an AA meeting, because Tracy had turned into an alcoholic, and she got better too. So it was kind of amazing. My life has become so rich. I've met so many people, so many different paths. This Zoom has opened up. I mean, to meet you people. I know a lot of you. Well, I know a few of you people on the screen today, and it's just so cool for me to meet new people and make new friends. I think I briefly touched on me getting married. My wife had 2 teenage kids when we got married. So here I am at 35, 40 years old, and I finally am starting a family. That was cool. Tomorrow is Easter here in New York. And tomorrow at Easter, my 4 grandkids are going to be coming over here. We're going to have an Easter egg hunt. My kids will all be here. We're going to have a big ham for dinner. My life is so full today, so rich today. When they leave after dinner tomorrow, I'm going to head off to the jail. I've got a little commitment I do on Sunday afternoons. I'm going to go see some more of my people. And it's just a wonderful life. I am not alone anymore. I really am not alone. I've got so many people. My phone is constantly ringing all day long. My phone rings, and I sponsor just a ton of people from all over the place. And it's just such a beautiful, beautiful, wonderful, wonderful world. I just can't describe it. I believe I've reached the end of the hour, Kim. Again, I apologize to everyone on the screen. I had thought this meeting started in 3 minutes. I didn't realize it ends in 3 minutes. Totally unprepared, undressed. I feel embarrassed, but I love you all. I really, really love you all. You people have been so attentive and so kind, and your smiles are just making my day. And I really, really love you all. So thank you for being here for me. Thank you very much.